They said the caged Alpha King would destroy anyone who fed him. She did, and now he won't let her go. The iron door at the bottom of the iron spire had not been opened in 11 days. Seren knew this because she counted. Everyone in the palace counted, quietly, the way you count the seconds between lightning and thunder, hoping the storm had moved on, never quite believing it had. She was not supposed to be in the lower corridor. No one was. The palace steward had made that clear the morning after Lord Fenwick's assistant lost 2 fingers trying to slide a water bowl through the cage grate. The man had screamed for an hour. The screaming was what Seren remembered most, not the blood, not the scramble of boots on stone, just the high, continuous sound of a man who had not expected pain to arrive that quickly. And yet here she was, holding a lantern in one hand and a half loaf of dark bread in the other, because the flooding in the east kitchen had pushed her through 3 wrong turns and a collapsed shelf, and the only dry route back to the upper floors passed directly through the corridor that no one used anymore. She told herself she was just passing through. She walked fast, eyes forward, lantern swinging. Then she heard breathing. Not ragged. Not animal. Steady and low, the kind of breathing that belongs to someone who has been watching you since before you noticed them. She stopped. The cell was set into the far wall, sealed behind a gate of thick black iron. The bars were close together, forged wide enough for air and nothing else. There was no torch on the wall near it. There was no water bowl. There was nothing at all except the dark, and inside the dark, 2 eyes that caught the light from her lantern and held it. She had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. Killing Ashvane, the dethroned Alpha King of Verathon, the man his own high council had chained and buried beneath the palace rather than execute cleanly, because a dead king was a matter, and a living one slowly fading in a cage was a warning. She had heard that he had broken a guard's arm through the bars without touching anything except the man's sleeve. She had heard that he did not sleep. She had heard that he had stopped speaking 6 months ago and that the silence coming from the lower corridor was somehow worse than the sounds that used to come from it. She stood very still and looked at him. He looked back. He was not what she expected. She had expected wild. She had expected something barely human, something the years of darkness and starvation had unmade. What she saw instead was a man sitting with his back straight against the far wall, knees drawn up, wrists loose across them. He was thin, the kind of thin that speaks of long, deliberate deprivation, but his posture had not broken. His hair was dark and tangled. His jaw was sharp and heavily stubbled. And his eyes, catching her lantern light from across the cell, were entirely, unsettlingly calm. He did not move. She could not move either. Her hands made the decision for her. Her left hand, the one holding the bread, pressed forward, and before she had consciously agreed to anything, she had crouched down and pushed the half-loaf under the iron door. The bread sat on the stone floor between them. He did not look at it. He kept looking at her. "I'm not supposed to be here," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. He said nothing. She stood up, tightened her grip on the lantern, and walked back the way she came, back through the flooding, back through the wrong corridors, back to the upper floors where the smell of roasting meat and candle wax replaced the smell of cold stone and iron. She lay awake that night thinking about the bread sitting on the floor. She lay awake thinking about whether he had eaten it. She came back the next morning. Not because she had decided to. Not because she had a reason she could explain out loud to anyone. She came back because she woke up before dawn and the first thought she had was about whether he had eaten the bread, and the only way to stop thinking about it was to go and see. She brought a cloth. Wrapped inside it were a small portion of roasted grain, a piece of dried fruit from the kitchen stores, and a cup of broth she had transferred into a shallow tin bowl that could fit under the gap in the gate. He was in the same position. Or near enough to it. Same wall. Same posture. The bread from the night before was gone. She slid the cloth under the door without speaking. She set the tin bowl beside it, careful to keep her fingers back from the gap. She waited. He looked at the food. He looked at her. Then, slowly, he reached forward and pulled the cloth toward him. "You came back," he said. His voice was low and rough, the kind of voice that had not been used in a long time, like a door whose hinges have gone dry. But it was not frightening. It was careful. Precise, even each word placed with the deliberateness of a man who has learned not to waste anything. Yes, she said. Why? She thought about it honestly, which she had not done yet. I wanted to know if you ate the bread. He was quiet for a moment. I did. Good, she said. And then, because she did not know what else to do, she stood up and left. She came back the next day. And the day after that. The palace above them continued its routines. Lord Regent Alder, the man who had engineered Kaelin's fall with 3 council signatures and a conveniently timed border dispute, held his morning audiences and his evening meals with the same careful performance of authority. The guards rotated. The kitchens produced their meals. The court whispered about the border and the harvest and the marriages being arranged for the season. Nobody talked about the lower corridor. Nobody mentioned that someone was keeping the former king alive. Seren understood, without anyone saying it to her, that she was doing something that would end very badly if discovered. She understood it the way you understand a step is loose before you put your full weight on it, the knowledge that lives in the body before it reaches the mind. She brought the food anyway. On the 6th day, she arrived to find him standing at the gate instead of sitting against the wall. She stopped a foot away. This close, the height difference registered. He was tall, taller than she remembered from the other side of the room, and even diminished as he was by 2 years of captivity. There was something in the way he held himself that reminded her less of a prisoner and more of someone choosing to remain still. "You're standing," she said, which was not a brilliant observation, but it was what came out. "You brought the broth again," he said. "Vegetable today." The kitchen had extra from the noon meal. He crouched to receive the tin bowl, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. She noticed, not for the first time, that he was always careful not to move quickly near the gate. She did not know if that was for her benefit or his. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated half a second. "Seren." He drank from the bowl slowly, with both hands wrapped around it as though warmth itself was something to be held onto carefully. "Seren," he repeated, like he was placing it somewhere specific. "I am Kaelin." "I know who you are," she said. "What they say I am," he said, "and who I am are different." She did not answer that. She was not sure she disagreed with it. She picked up the empty tin when he passed it back under the gate, tucked it under her arm, and left the way she always left, quickly, quietly, by the long route that avoided the guard's rotation. 3 corridors up, she realized her hands were not shaking anymore. They had been shaking every other time. She had not noticed when they stopped. The palace steward announced a full inventory of the lower levels 2 days later. Routine maintenance, he called it. Seren spent the whole morning certain she was about to be caught. She spent the afternoon certain. She spent the evening sitting in the kitchen scrubbing pots with the other maids and listening for boots in the corridor and hearing nothing. The inventory came and went. The lower corridor was recorded as empty and sealed. She went back the following morning. Kaelin was standing at the gate again. He had torn a strip from his sleeve and used it to bind a cut on his palm. From the edge of the gate, she guessed, though she did not ask. He looked at her when she arrived the way he always looked at her now, directly, without the blankness she had first mistaken for vacancy. What she understood now was that it was not blankness. It was concentration. "The inventory," he said. "Came to nothing," she said. "You were careful." "I'm always careful." "Not always," he said. "The first night you came down here, you were not careful at all. You were lost." She set the wrapped cloth down near the gate. "And you didn't try to use that?" "No." "Why not?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, "Because you brought bread." She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, somewhere far above them, the palace bells rang the morning hour, 7 clean, iron strokes that traveled down through stone and timber and distance and arrived in the lower corridor sounding like something from another world entirely. Seren picked up the empty cloth and left. She had been doing this for 18 days. She had not told a single person. The 19th day, a woman named Clara from the upper serving staff passed Sharon in the corridor near the east stairwell and looked at the covered tin in her hands with a small, careful, entirely dangerous kind of attention. Sharon said good morning and kept walking. Behind her, Clara said nothing. But her silence had a shape to it. And Sharon, climbing the stairs back to the kitchen, felt the shape of it following her up every step. The silence from Clara lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, Sharon arrived at the lower corridor to find that someone had been there before her. She knew it immediately. The floor near the gate had been disturbed, the thin layer of grit that settled on the stone in the unlit corridor had been scuffed, as if someone had stood very close to the bars and then backed away fast. There was no food left. No note. Nothing at all except the evidence of someone who had come and decided to go. She crouched at the gate. Kael was already awake, already watching. Someone came before you, he said quietly. I saw. She slid the food through the gap. Did they speak? No. They looked. Then they left. She sat back on her heels. Her heart was doing something uncomfortable in her chest, a tight and rapid thing she recognized as fear that had been waiting for its moment. Could you see their face? No. Small. Quick steps. Clara had quick steps. Clara was small. Sharon filed that fact away in the place where she kept things she did not want to look at directly. I'll be more careful about the route. Sharon. His voice was low. If you need to stop coming. I'm not stopping. He was quiet. I'm not stopping, she said again, more quietly this time. Not for him, she realized that even as she said it. For herself. She began taking a longer route to the lower corridor, adding 15 minutes to each trip by going through the laundry passages on the west side of the palace, where the steam from the washing rooms obscured the smell of food and where the only people working were too tired and too focused to pay attention to a maid moving through with a covered cloth. It was not a perfect solution. There was no perfect solution. But it bought her time, and in the lower corridor, time had always been the currency that mattered most. She did not see Clara again for a week. When she did, a brief crossing of paths in the kitchen corridor, Clara looked at her for 2 full seconds before looking away. There was something in that look that Sharon could not read. Not hostility. Not curiosity either. Something more complicated than either. Below, in the cell, Kael was changing. Not dramatically. Not in ways that anyone watching from the outside would notice. But Sharon noticed because she was there every day, and she had come to know the small gradations of him the way you come to know a difficult piece of music, not by its loudness but by its silences. He was sitting straighter. Not that he had ever truly slumped, but there had been a quality to his stillness before that was close to exhaustion, a deep, settled tiredness at the bone level. That quality was receding. In its place was something more alert, more considered. He had begun doing something in the small hours of the morning, she guessed from the way his movements were looser when she arrived, stretching, or pacing, or something that used his body in the way a man uses a body he has decided to keep. He also talked more. Not about himself. Still not about himself, or very little. He asked her questions. About the palace above them, not political questions, not questions about the regent or the council or the state of his former territories. Questions that surprised her with their smallness, whether the old maple in the east courtyard was still alive, whether the autumn market on the river road had happened yet this year, whether the palace cook still burned the evening bread on Tuesdays because he always started a second cup of wine with dinner before the bread was done. The maple was still alive. The market had happened but smaller than usual. And yes, the cook still burned the Tuesday bread. Kael had smiled at that. Just barely, the corners of his mouth shifted upward slightly, a movement so brief and unfamiliar on his face that she almost missed it. But she saw it. She tucked it away with the other things she was collecting without quite meaning to. You were a king for how long? She asked him one morning. 6 years after my father's death. He paused. For before the council decided I was inconvenient. What made you inconvenient? He looked at her with those calm, direct eyes. I would not give the Southern Territories to Alder's family. The territories had 3 river routes and the only deep harbor in the north. Alder called it a matter of strategic alliance. I called it him helping himself to things that belonged to the kingdom. A pause. We were both right, in a way. It was strategic. It was also theft. And the council sided with him. The council was afraid of what saying no to him would cost them. Men who are afraid make calculations. Their calculations rarely include people who are not at the table. Seren thought about that. She thought about being a kitchen maid, about being so far from any table that no calculation ever included her either. She thought about the bread she had pushed under a gate one night for no clear reason, and how that single thoughtless act had somehow led her here, crouching on cold stone every morning, talking to a dethroned king about maple trees and burnt bread. You're thinking, he said. I think a lot. I know. You go quiet in a particular way when you do it. That surprised her. You've been watching me that closely. There is not a great deal else to watch, he said simply. But something in his voice made the answer feel less simple than its words. She stood, dusted her knees, and reached for the empty cloth. Seren, he said. She stopped. The maple tree. The one in the east courtyard. When my father was alive, he used to walk around it 3 times every morning. He said the walk told him how the day would go, the feel of the air, the light on the back. He paused. I haven't thought about that in a long time. She didn't know what to say. She said, I'll walk past it on my way to the morning storage. She did. The maple was old and enormous, and the morning light came through it in long thin strips across the courtyard stone, and she stood under it for exactly 1 minute before the cold moved her along. She did not tell him it was beautiful. She told him the bark was darker on the north side and that there was a bird's empty nest near the top that swayed in the wind but hadn't fallen. He listened like she was describing something precious. 3 days later, Clara found her. Not in the lower corridor. Seren had been careful enough that Clara hadn't followed her there again. Clara found her in the laundry passage, in the early hours before the washing rooms opened, and she planted herself in the middle of the narrow corridor with her arms folded and her face set. You're feeding him, Clara said. Seren did not insult her by denying it. Yes. Do you know what they'll do to you if they find out? I have some idea. Clara stared at her. She was older than Seren by about 10 years, a practical, unsentimental woman who had worked in the palace since before the current regent's rule and who had survived 3 changes of administration by being very good at keeping her head down and her opinions private. Her staring at Seren now was the most openly she had ever looked at anyone. Why? Clara asked. I don't know, Seren said. It was the truest answer she had. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the guard rotation changes on the 4th morning of each week. The South Passage is on watch for about 20 minutes while they move. You would have a longer window. Seren stared at her. Clara picked up her laundry basket and walked past her without looking back. I didn't say anything, she said over her shoulder. I didn't see anything. You didn't hear me. Seren stood in the empty passage alone for a moment, holding her covered cloth, breathing carefully. Then she used the South Passage on the 4th morning. Kael noticed immediately. The route is different today. Better window, she said. He watched her settle into her usual crouch near the gate. She handed the tin through. He took it with the same careful deliberateness he always did. Someone helped you, he said. Someone didn't see something they didn't hear, she said. He was quiet for a moment, turning the tin in his hands. People take great risks for small kindnesses sometimes. She didn't do it for kindness, Seren said. I think she's tired of being afraid all the time. A pause. I understand that. Kael looked at her. He set the tin down and looked at her the way he did when he was being most careful and most direct at once. You are not afraid of me, he said. You were, the first night. But not now. No, she agreed. Why not? She thought about it. Because you have never once tried to use what I give you against me. You could have. You had information that I was coming, when I was coming, that someone was watching for me. You could have bargained with that. Told a guard, leveraged it for better conditions. She met his eyes. You didn't. No, he said. Why not? His jaw tightened slightly. Because you brought bread, he said. It was the same answer he had given before. This time, it meant something different. She knew it. He knew she knew it. She picked up the empty tin and left. On the walk back through the south passage, the fourth morning silence stretching around her like a gift, she counted her steps without meaning to and lost count somewhere around 40. Above her, the palace hummed with its ordinary business. Below, in the cell, a man sat with his back straight and his eyes open in the dark, holding on to something she did not have a word for yet. 16 days after Clara's warning in the passage, the stewardsman came to the kitchen with a list of names. Seren's was on it. The summons was polite, which was how you knew it was serious. She was escorted, not dragged, not hauled, but escorted by 2 men in the regent's livery who walked on either side of her with a professional courtesy that left no room for turning around, up 3 flights of stairs and into a room she had never been in, one of the former receiving rooms on the north side of the palace where Lord Regent Alder held his smaller, quieter conversations. He was waiting at the window. Alder was not what she had expected from a man who had taken a kingdom by bureaucratic maneuvering. She had expected someone slick, someone who looked like what he was. Instead he was simply tired-looking, a man of middle years with grey at his temples and the focused, practiced patience of someone who was very good at waiting. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "You have been visiting the lower corridor," he said. No question mark. No rising inflection. He had already confirmed this somewhere else, with someone else. He was just telling her what he knew so she understood the ground they were standing on. "Yes," she said. He looked at her with mad curiosity, the way you look at something small that has done something unexpected. "Why?" She gave him the same honest answer she had given Clara. "I don't know." He was quiet for a moment. "Have you spoken with him?" "Yes." "What has he told you?" She looked at Alder steadily. He looked back. The room was warm and very quiet. "He told me about a maple tree," she said. "And about burnt bread on Tuesdays." Alder studied her face for a long time. She kept her face still, not blank. Blank looked like hiding, but still. Composed. "The thing about your situation," he said at last, measuring each word, "is that I need to know what value you represent. Either you are a soft-hearted girl who wandered into something foolish, or you are something more useful than that." He folded his hands. "Tell me what he said to you that matters. Names, plans, anyone he has communicated with, any mention of loyalists or assets or..." "He talked about a tree," she said. "And about bread. That is all I have for you." The 2 men on either side of the room shifted very slightly. Alder did not shift at all. "You understand," he said quietly, "that refusing to cooperate has consequences." "Yes," she said. "And you are still choosing this?" "I'm not choosing anything," she said. "I'm telling you what I know. I know about a tree and about bread. That is the truth. I can't give you something I don't have." He looked at her a moment longer. Then he nodded once, with the precise, contained movement of a man making a calculation. "You'll stay in the palace," he said. "In your current position. Under observation. You will not return to the lower corridor." He stood. She understood the meeting was over. She was escorted out the way she came in, back down 3 flights of stairs, back into the kitchen corridor where the smell of broth and wood smoke replaced the smell of formal rooms and political patience. She stood alone in the kitchen, hands loose at her sides. The message she had sent him was not in her words. It was in what she had not said. And below her, 3 flights down through stone and iron and the silence of the lower corridor, in a cell that the palace records listed as empty, Kaelin Ashvane heard about her silence before the evening was over, through a guide he had spent 22 months quietly learning to read. He sat with it a long time. He had not asked her to protect him. He had not asked her for anything except what she had already given: bread, broth, the name of a bird's nest in a maple tree. She had protected him anyway. He looked at the wall. He looked at the gate. He looked at the dark gap at the bottom of the iron door where, every morning for 26 days, a cloth had appeared. He made his decision not loudly, not dramatically, not the way decisions are made in stories. He made it the way a man makes a decision when the thing he is deciding is already settled and has been for longer than he realized. Then he sat very still, in the dark, and began to think. What Seren did not know, what Oda did not yet know either, was that Kaelin had not been entirely idle in 2 years. Stillness is not passivity. He had learned that young, from his father, who used to walk around a maple tree every morning not because he was lost in sentiment but because the walk showed him which of his guards was watching the courtyard and which was watching the gate. Observation was strategy. Patience was a weapon. The cage was a disadvantage, not a defeat. He had spent the first 6 months in genuine survival mode, managing hunger, managing the cold, managing the psychological weight of absolute confinement. The second 6 months he had spent learning the patterns of everyone who came within earshot of the lower corridor. Guards had shifts. Guards had habits. Guards had small anxieties and small loyalties and small grievances that they carried with them into the dark of the lower floor and occasionally expressed in brief, unguarded moments when they thought no one capable of understanding was present. Kaelin was capable of understanding. He had identified 3 guards who harbored private doubts about the regime. One, a man named Owen, who had served the palace since before Kaelin's reign, was not a doubt but a loyalty waiting for the right moment to become active again. Kaelin had communicated nothing to Owen directly. The risk was too high. But he had watched Owen's pattern for months and determined that the man's shift on the 4th morning of each week brought him down the South Passage alone for a window of roughly 20 minutes. When Seren had started using the South Passage, guided by Clara, who did not know she was also, inadvertently, guided by 22 months of Kaelin's patience, Owen had noticed. And in the way that men who are waiting for a sign recognize a sign, Owen had made a choice. He had told Kaelin about the interrogation within 2 hours of Seren being escorted upstairs. Kaelin sat with this information for a long time. She had protected him. She had been given a clear opportunity to minimize her own danger, to say something small and true about military plans she didn't have and intelligence she hadn't received, and instead she had said, "He told me about a tree." She had told the truth in such a way that the truth protected him. He thought about her face. He had memorized it the way you memorize the face of the only light source in a dark room, not deliberately, but completely. The brown of her eyes and the set of her jaw and the particular stillness she fell into when she was thinking something through. He thought about how she crouched at the gate with her knees on cold stone without apparent discomfort, like someone who had spent a long time making herself comfortable in uncomfortable places. He thought about what Oda would do next. Oda was not impulsive. He was a strategist of the quiet kind, the kind who moved pieces carefully and never overcorrected. He would observe Seren. He would watch for further contact. And when he was confident he had extracted what value she had, or when he was certain she had none, he would remove her from the board cleanly. Not necessarily violently. Oda preferred clean. Kaelin could not allow that. He waited until Owen's next rotation and sent a single short message. Not in writing, nothing written, nothing that could be found. He delivered it the way he had delivered the few other communications he had risked over 2 years, through a sequence of positions and objects that meant nothing alone and everything together to someone who knew the code. The code was known by exactly 2 people. One of them was Kaelin. The other was a man named Gil Hero, who had been his chief military advisor before the council vote and who had disappeared so completely afterward that Oda's people had listed him as fled to the eastern provinces. Gil had not fled east. Owen did not know any of this. Owen simply moved 3 objects in the South Passage into a specific arrangement during his early morning sweep and then went about his work. 2 days later, Owen found a response in the same South Passage, in the same code. Gil was alive. Gil was in the city. Gil had been waiting. The message back from Gil contained one question: what do you need? Kaelin's response was 3 words. Get the girl out. He did not say this because Seren was his. He said it because she had kept him alive for 26 days and had just spent a morning in a room with Order protecting a secret that was not even hers, and the regime was going to use her up and discard her, and she deserved better than that. He was also not naive enough to ignore that his reasons were not purely strategic. He had thought about her every day for 26 days. He had thought about her voice, which was level and unhurried even when she was frightened, and she had been frightened. Most mornings, he had heard it beneath the steadiness. He had thought about the way she described the maple trees back on the north side. He had thought about how she had said "I'm not stopping" with the quiet finality of someone who had found a line they would not cross back over. He did not examine those thoughts too closely. He was in a cage with bars too thick to bend and a future that was not yet visible from where he sat. Thoughts of that kind were a luxury he had not earned. What he had earned was this: a message to Gil, a guard whose loyalty had found its moment, and a plan that was beginning to take shape in the dark of the lower corridor like a structure being assembled in the absence of light, each piece placed carefully, each connection tested, the whole of it held together by nothing except patience and precision and the absolute certainty that one more move was still available to him. He ate the food that Seren could no longer bring. Owen brought it now, quietly, folded into the ordinary rounds of his shift, and he sat with his back straight and his eyes open, and he thought. Above him, the palace held its breath without knowing it. 3 corridors up, Seren scrubbed pots. She had been told not to go to the lower corridor. She had not gone. She kept her hands busy and her face neutral, and she did not look in the direction of the stairwell that led down. She thought about the bread she was not bringing and the tin she was not sliding under the gate, and the fact that 3 days had passed and she did not know if he was eating. Clara passed through the kitchen twice and said nothing and did not look at her. But on the second pass, she set a cloth-wrapped parcel on the shelf near Seren's station without breaking her stride or acknowledging that she had done it. Inside the cloth was a message. Not in writing, a series of knotted threads that meant nothing to most people and something specific to Seren only because Clara had shown her the pattern once, years ago, as a joke. The old palace servant code, predating the current regime by 60 years, used to pass notes between floors when the head steward was on a temperance and banned wine from the lower staff. The message read, "He knows. He is moving. Stay quiet. Be ready." Seren held the threads for a long time. Be ready for what? She did not ask. She put the threads in her pocket and went back to the pots. Her heart was doing the tight rapid thing again. She let it do it. She breathed through it. She thought about a man sitting straight-backed in a dark cell, thinking in the dark, and she decided that if he was moving, then whatever he had planned was not nothing. She had no basis for this confidence except 26 mornings of bread and silence and the things you learn about a person when you watch them choose, over and over again, not to be less than they are. She was not afraid. She was not calm either. She was something in the space between the two, steady, present, waiting, a person who has decided to see something through without knowing yet what true looks like. Kaelin's message reached Gil on a Thursday. By the following Monday, Gil had identified 2 things: a gap in the guard rotation on the east side of the lower floor and the name of the servant girl who had been summoned to Order's receiving room and returned alive and cooperative looking to the kitchen. On Tuesday, Owen moved 3 objects in the south passage. On Wednesday morning, a different cloth appeared on Seren's kitchen shelf. She opened it in the laundry passage, alone, and read the single knotted line. 4th morning. East stairs. Wait. She stood in the passage for a long moment with the cloth in her hands. The washing rooms were starting up around the corner, the sound of water and steam and low voices beginning the day's work. She put the cloth in her pocket. She did not sleep well on Wednesday night. She was not afraid of the plan, she didn't even know the plan, but she was afraid of the shape of what was happening around her, the sense of forces that had been still for a very long time beginning to move. She thought of Order's face when he had told her she was under observation. She thought of Clara setting that cloth on the shelf without looking at her. She thought of a cage at the bottom of a dark corridor and a man whose voice had a quality of absolute and considered quiet even when everything around him was stripped away. She had not once, in 26 mornings, seen him afraid. She decided that she was allowed to take something from that. On Thursday, the 4th morning, she got up before dawn. She dressed carefully. She tied her hair back. She went to her station in the kitchen and worked the first 2 hours without variation, without anything that anyone watching could have read as preparation. At the 7th hour, when the guard rotation shifted and the east stairs stood briefly in their between hours quiet, she put down her work cloth, stepped out of the kitchen, and walked to the east stairs. She waited. 40 seconds later, a man she did not recognize came up the stairs from below, moving quickly and quietly, and behind him, walking without chains for the first time in 2 years, his head high and his eyes moving steadily over the corridor in the way a man's eyes move when he is reading a room he once owned, was Kael. He was thinner than she had imagined from the other side of the bus. Taller. The 2 years had left marks on him, in the sharpness of his face, in the careful, deliberate way he moved, like a man who had learned not to trust his legs and was relearning it. But his posture was the same as it had always been. Straight. Chosen. His eyes found her immediately. He stopped. They looked at each other in the corridor. She had been expecting something, she wasn't sure what. Something big. Something ceremonial, some moment equal to the size of what had passed between them. "Seren," he said. "Kael," she said. He nodded once, like a confirmation. Then he moved past her toward the passage that led to the east wing, following the man she didn't recognize, and she fell into step beside him because there was nowhere else she could imagine going right now. Behind them, the east stairs stood empty. Above them, the palace went about its morning. Nothing had announced itself. Nothing had paused. The world was the same and entirely different, and they moved through it together, quickly and quietly, toward whatever was waiting on the other side of the door that Gil Hero was already holding open. Kael had been free for 4 hours, and in those 4 hours he had done the following: changed clothes with Owen's help, studied a hand-drawn map that Gil had prepared over 7 months of patient observation, eaten a full meal for the first time in 2 years without stopping himself. He had never fully eaten what Seren brought, always saved a portion, kept his hunger manageable rather than satisfied, because a man in a cage who eats everything is a man who has given up, and given 12 minutes of his attention to a man named Bren who had been holding a small network together underground since the fall of the council vote and who had information that changed the tactical picture considerably. He had not, in those 4 hours, spent very much time thinking about Seren. He had thought about her constantly. This was a problem he was not sure how to solve, and he was a man who solved problems for a living. She was in the room down the hall, one of 3 rooms in the old Stuart annex that Gil used as a base, its windows shuttered, its location known to 5 people total. She had not been given a role in the planning meeting because she was not a general or an operative, and he did not want her pulled into the military mechanics of what came next any further than she had already been pulled. He also knew this was not going to work for very long. Seren had opinions about her own involvement. He had learned this over 26 mornings. She did not argue loudly. She simply moved forward in the direction she had decided on, with a quiet and very firm intentionality that he found more difficult to redirect than shouting would have been. After the planning meeting, he dismissed Gil and Bren with tasks and walked down the hall and knocked on the closed door. "Come in," she said. She was sitting on a wooden bench near the shuttered window, not doing anything, just sitting with her hands in her lap and her face turned toward the light coming through the shutter slats in thin bright lines. She looked up when he came in. He stood in the doorway. He was not sure, suddenly, what to say. This had not been a problem in the cell. In the cell, the bars had organized the space between them clearly. Here, in a plain room with no bars, the space was unstructured, and he was aware of being very close to her for the first time. "How are you?" he asked. "Fine," she said. Confused. A little cold. He looked around, found a spare coat on a hook, and brought it to her. She took it and pulled it on without ceremony. "You organized that very quickly," she said. "The guard, the route, the man waiting at the east stairs. I had time to plan. 22 months of time. Approximately." She looked at him steadily. "You knew this was going to happen eventually." I hoped, he said. Hope and knowledge are different things. What changed? She asked. What made it happen now and not 3 months ago or 3 months from now? He paused for one beat. You, he said. She absorbed this without blinking. I got caught. You got caught and protected me, and I was not willing to let others decide what happened to you next. He said it plainly, without flourish, because he had learned that plain was the language she trusted most. She looked at him for a long moment. You didn't have to do that. No. You should have been focused on your own situation. I was, he said. You were my situation. Something shifted in her face, not dramatically, not a transformation. Just a small, quiet shift, like light moving on back. What happens now? She said. Gil has allies in 4 of the 7 regional commands. 2 council members who voted for my removal have since been removed themselves by order, which means they are motivated. The region's support is thinner than it looks from the outside. It is built on fear, and fear is a temporary material. And me specifically, she said. In this plan. What do I do? He looked at her. He had thought about this. He had thought about it carefully, with the same care he had applied to guard rotations and coded messages and the 14 steps between the east stair gate and the annex door. Whatever you decide, he said. She blinked. That's not an answer. It is the only honest one. You were not recruited. You were not drafted. You made a choice to bring bread to a man in a cage, and every subsequent choice has been yours. I am not going to redirect that now by telling you what role to play. She was quiet. He stayed in the doorway, not moving, giving her the space to think the way he had learned she needed it, not silence exactly, just room. I want to be useful, she said finally. Not decorative. Not kept safe in a corner somewhere. I know. And I want to know what's happening. I don't like being managed. I know that too. She looked at him for a long moment. You've been paying attention. Yes, he said simply. Something about the plainness of it, the complete absence of performance in it, just yes, I have been paying attention, as if this were an ordinary thing to admit rather than an enormous one, made her look away briefly at the shuttered window. The maple tree, she said. He waited. On the east courtyard. Your father walked around it every morning. Yes. We'll get back to it, she said. Not a question. Not quite a promise. Something between the two, a statement that had the shape of intention. He looked at her in the thin light from the shuttered window, in the plain room that smelled of wood and old stone, and felt something he had not felt in 2 years, which was not hope exactly. Hope was something you leaned into, and he was not a man who leaned, but something adjacent to it. A sense of weight redistributing. Of standing more fully on his own feet. Yes, he said. We will. The plan moved quickly from that point. It had to. Order would notice Kaelin's absence within hours, possibly less. The element of surprise was the most valuable thing they had, and it was burning down like a candle. Gil moved through the network with the efficiency of a man who had spent 7 months preparing for exactly this. Regional contacts were activated. 2 of Order's own guard captains, men who had served under Kaelin before and taken positions under the new regime to keep themselves alive, received a signal they had been waiting for and began the slow, careful work of making themselves available in key positions. Seren was given a role. She had asked for one, and she was good at the things it required, moving through the palace without attracting attention, reading the mood of the rooms she passed through, noticing small things that larger, louder people missed. She carried messages twice in the next 48 hours, wrapped in kitchen cloths the way she used to wrap bread, moving through the laundry passage and the east corridor and the spaces between official notice with a fluency that she had, apparently, been developing for 26 days without knowing it was training. She was not afraid. Or she was, and she was choosing to act in spite of it, which amounts to the same thing in practice. Kaelin watched her from a distance more than he wanted to admit. He watched her move through a room and read it and exit cleanly, and he thought about the first night she had crouched at his gate and pushed bread through the gap with no reason to do it except that she was in the wrong corridor at the right time and some part of her had made a decision faster than her mind could catch up to. He was deeply, privately in trouble. He recognized this. He was a man who had run a kingdom, led armies, navigated councils of men who wanted him gone. He knew what it felt like to be outmaneuvered by something you hadn't seen coming. What he had not expected was to be outmaneuvered by a kitchen maid who described maple bark. He kept the recognition private because there was a war to win first. The confrontation at the palace, calling it a battle would be too dramatic, though there were tense hours and 3 brief physical altercations that could generously be called such, came on the 7th day after the escape. It was not a great thundering clash. It was Order's support evaporating in pieces, like a structure whose load-bearing walls have been quietly removed. When 2 regional commanders declared for Kael and Order's most reliable council block fractured under the pressure of a carefully placed piece of evidence, financial records that Gil had been sitting on for 7 months, documenting exactly where the Southern Territory funds had actually gone, the regent's position became untenable faster than anyone, including Kael, had expected. Order did not fight it loudly. He had never been a loud man. He made his calculation, as he always did, and the calculation this time came out pointing at a door. He took it. Kael stood in his own council chamber for the first time in 2 years on a grey morning with rain against the windows, and the smell of the room, old books, candle smoke, the specific code of high stone rooms, hit him so suddenly that he stood still for a moment with his hand on the doorframe. Then he walked in. There was much to do. There was an enormous, staggering amount to do, territories to reassess, alliances to rebuild, a council to reconstitute from people who had not spent the last 2 years making themselves comfortable in the architecture of fear. He started immediately because that was the only way to start. He did not find Seren that first day. He wanted to, and he did not, because he was very aware that wanting to find her first was exactly the kind of wanting he had been keeping carefully private, and the council chamber was not the place to stop being private about it. He found her on the 2nd day. She was in the east courtyard, standing near the maple tree, looking up at the empty nest near the top. She had her coat pulled close against the autumn cold and her hair loose, and she did not hear him coming across the courtyard stone until he was close enough that she turned with a small start and then settled when she saw who it was. They stood together under the maple. The light came through the branches at a low autumn angle, long and warm and slow. I walked around it this morning, she said. 3 times. Like your father. He looked at the tree. He looked at her. And today will be complicated, she said. But it will also be good. He turned that over. It was not the kind of answer a strategist would give. It was better than a strategist's answer. He looked at her face in the morning light. She looked back at him with the steadiness he had come to know better than almost anything, the particular quality of her attention that was not passive, was never passive, was always a choice she was actively making. I owe you something, he said. You don't, she said. I brought bread. You got us both out. We are even. We are not even, he said. And you know we are not even. She was quiet. I want you to stay, he said. Not as a courtier. Not as a political asset. He left the categories out because she would notice them and she would not accept them and she would be right. I want you to stay because I have thought about you every day for longer than I am willing to admit in a courtyard where anyone might walk through, and I would like to continue to think about you in proximity rather than at a distance. She looked at him for a long moment. The corner of her mouth moved. That, she said, was possibly the least romantic declaration I have ever heard. I am a strategist, he said. Not a poet. No, she agreed. You are not a poet. The corner of her mouth completed its movement. It became a smile, small and clear and entirely her own. Yes, she said. Yes, what? Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I heard what you said. Yes, all of it. She turned back to the maple. Was that clear enough or do you need me to be more specific? He stood beside her under the old tree in the autumn light, and for the first time in 2 years he felt the cold as a simple sensation rather than a threat, just the air of the season on his skin, with the sound of the city beyond the courtyard walls beginning its morning. Clear enough, he said. They stood there for a while, not moving, while the palace woke up around them. There was no ceremony about it. There was no announcement. There was just a courtyard and a tree and two people who had found each other in the dark of a corridor that no one was supposed to use, and had, against every sensible calculation, decided to remain in each other's orbit. Later, when Gil asked where the king had been during the first morning of his restoration, the answer he received was, in the courtyard. Gil decided not to ask further. In the east wing, in the council chamber, the work waited, and Kaelin would go to it, and Seron would find her footing in a palace that no longer thought of her as only a kitchen maid, and the business of rebuilding a kingdom from the inside out would take months and cost more than either of them could calculate from where they stood. But that was later. That was the next part of the story, the long, difficult, necessary part. This part, this small, quiet, unheroic part, was a man and a woman under an old maple tree in the morning, the nest still swaying at the top, the bark still darker on the north side, the day just beginning to tell them how it would go.